Okay, so we started this class on the Second Amendment by saying this isn't about the Second Amendment. It's about the Second Amendment being transformed into a political tool that could be used to drive wedges between Americans. And that this is part of an effort that began during World War II and arguably began really at the very beginning of the country. When you review the Articles of Confederation, you can see that there was not an appetite for joining together as one nation. And so we've been, we have many different constituencies in America, but on a broad scale, we've had those who were the slave masters, and then we had others who were the abolitionists. And those two forces have never come together, and they're mutually exclusive positions. And when something is mutually exclusive, it's impossible to get it to join together. We could join together during World War II because Hitler was such a great threat. Often when you talk about history or something like Hitler, we all know what happened, what transformed, what transpired. But at the time, people didn't know this is what's going to happen next. They couldn't read the final chapter. They just have to experience it and go through it. But and there were people who were supporters of Hitler in America, the Nazi Party, and but as they came to learn more and more about what Hitler was doing, it posed a great threat to the whole world. So we joined together and we were united during World War II, and people will refer to it as the greatest generation because it's the one generation where we seemed to be one nation. That doesn't mean it was that there weren't exceptions to the rule. Black people were still considered second-class citizens, but Black people had participated in the military effort, and there was a sense that there would be a transformation of that in the post-war. However, those who were the titans of industry were terribly afraid of government manufacturing. During World War II, the government went into all businesses that contributed to the war effort, and they audited them. They did a business review of what they were doing, and they could dictate to the business owner what they could and could not do. And for the titans of industry, the people who believe they are, all powerful, that was a bridge too far. And so they started their effort to want to undermine America. The problem was that at the end of World War II, Americans loved their country and they loved their government. And so to try to separate Americans from America so that you can tear down the government required driving wedges. It's a tactic that's been used for thousands of years. United we stand, divided we fall. This is not new, but it is important to recognize when that tactic is being used during your lifetime. And the Second Amendment was just one of several tools that were used to drive wedges. Mind you, during this period from World War II to today, there are other massive changes that have taken place. Telecommunications is enormous. You know, during World War II, the way you got the news wasn't by turning on the TV. You had to go to a movie theater. That's where you would get the news. And so what has emerged is a very extensive and very powerful communications system, and many different ways in which to communicate with the public. And at the same time was the development of social psychology. And a little loud. I'm doing my best, Madeline, I am. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get there. And so what you had is social psychology comes about. Freud was there. His nephew Bernays took it and created public relations, which we've talked about in other classes. And so there were techniques that could be used to further influence and divide Americans against America. And so what we have today, we've arrived at a point where people, the thing that was not controversial, the Second Amendment, suddenly became a rallying cry for freedom and people to be against the government. And so what I want to do is, I have a lengthy video that I want to show you, which I feel captures and highlights how dysfunctional it has become. And so let's take a look at what this movement related to the Second Amendment, which I think we've established. The Second Amendment had nothing to do with an individual right to have a weapon. It had everything to do with the militia and James Madison wanting to satisfy the complaints of Patrick Henry, who was afraid of losing the militia because the militia was essential for controlling slaves and for fighting Indians.
We gathered under the tables and just listened to nonstop gunfire happening right outside the door.
It's like playing Russian roulette with your kids. There's no way you can protect them anymore.
If there's even one life that can be saved, then we've got an obligation to try.
The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
Responsible gun owners absolutely have the right to keep and bear arms in a safe and responsible manner.
The NRA has blood on its hands. We need gun control now.
Hello, I'm Shihab Ratansi. Welcome to the first of Inside Story America's three-part special on guns, culture, and crime in the United States. Today we're at the Blue Ridge Armory and Range, and on this show we'll explore why so many Americans are passionate about owning guns. There are nearly 300 million firearms in the United States. That's almost as many guns as there are people. It is in fact the most heavily armed country per capita in the world. But since 20 children were shot and killed in an elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut, the call for tougher gun controls has been louder than it has been for decades. But those calls have also prompted many to go out and buy more guns. Across the country, stores like this one in Virginia have reported a massive increase in sales. One salesman told us they simply could not keep up with demand, as gun owners fear that new regulations could infringe on their right to bear arms. Kimberly Halkett traveled to West Virginia to discover more about this country's devotion to guns.
My dad grew up shooting. His parents before him, and he taught me when I was young, starting with a BB gun. I'm ready. You ready?
Yeah, let's go hot. All right, I got you zeroed in on.
From the time he was a boy, Vincent Green has enjoyed spending time in the wilderness and shooting guns for sport. Vince owns several firearms, including a bolt-action hunting rifle. But when it comes to target shooting, he says that for precision and speed,
You're pounding around the second green ring on the outside.
his AR-15 is the weapon of choice. But it's also one of the firearms at the center of America's debate over gun control.
This is the argument. You don't
need this if you're a sportsman.
Obviously, they look different. You know, this is a great rifle, a fun rifle for target shooting, just like this. You can shoot these precision, you can shoot this precision. It all depends on how you set it up with the optic. What this gives you over that is this has better ergonomics, which you get from having an adjustable stock, which, and then having a pistol grip. And this way it's easy to fit it to the shooter, and you can better hold onto the rifle. You can put a broomstick handle, they call it, on here. You know, I prefer this angled foregrip, something that gives me easier control and gripping it and holding it. Well, in most states, at least for deer hunting, the round that this shoots, a .223 round, is too small, and you need to have .224 or bigger in most states, just because it's not considered powerful enough and humane enough to bring down a deer.
Vince says those in favor of more gun control simply misunderstand how and why so many Americans like himself enjoy the sport.
It's something fun to do in the woods, and frankly, that's where I love to be, is out in a more rural setting like this. Was I dinging you with the rounds?
Yep.
But the American passion for firearms isn't confined to just rural spaces like these mountains in West Virginia. Donnell Dover grew up in Brooklyn, and until 5 years ago, Donnell had never used a firearm. Now he manages a gun range and store just outside Washington, D.C.
Last year I went out hunting for my first time ever. Yes, it was long and drawn out, but to me it was very interesting. My 12-year-old, I bring him out. He loves to come out to the range. There's a lot of families that come out to shoot. They'll bring their little kids, and it's something they pass down.
But it's an American tradition that so many fear will come to an end if new U.S. gun control measures are put in place. That's despite assurances by the U.S. president the proposals are not meant to infringe on the right to bear arms.
Open, shut, ready to fire.
Growing up in the Midwest, Elizabeth says her family never owned guns, but now she wants one to keep her family safe.
I live in a big city now. I've got a baby on the way. I've got a responsibility, a life to protect. And I feel much more comfortable knowing that I have a way to defend myself, my family, should there be an intruder. The reality is, if a criminal has a product like that, if the government has a product like that, and as a free citizen in a free society, I'm denied the right to owning that product, then I think philosophically there's a bigger problem there.
Indeed, an American's right to arm themselves is historic. It's enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. And it's a right, Vince says, must be preserved since millions of Americans who do own guns use them safely.
I definitely feel like it makes me look like I'm a criminal in some way just because I like guns and have guns and like to shoot guns. And, I don't appreciate that it seems like almost everyone in the media seems to portray gun owners that way.
For Vince, owning a firearm is an important part of the American culture and tradition. And it's a right he hopes will remain for future generations.
Yeah, that's still 4 o'clock.
Kimberly Halkett, Al Jazeera, Bloomery, West Virginia.
Gun control advocates say that the fear that new regulations would endanger the country's gun traditions are unfounded. They say they simply want legislation that would reduce deadly gun violence. After losing his sister in the Virginia Tech mass shooting in 2007, one man made it his life's mission to campaign for a more effective background check system. He now works with the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, among other groups. Here's his story.
My name is Omar Samaha. My sister Rima Samaha was one of the victims killed at Virginia Tech on April 16th, and this is her room. It's frozen in time exactly the way that she left it. A lot of these pictures are from her graduation from high school. And it's hard to imagine this room empty, to be honest with you. I don't know if we'll ever get rid of it. I was actually here. I was in this bed. It was in the morning on April 16th. My dad came and woke me up, and he was like, 2 people were killed at Virginia Tech. And the news started to spread really quickly, and the death toll started to rise at this point. We all jumped in the same car. It was the fastest I had ever driven to Virginia Tech, but it also was the longest drive ever. A gentleman who was a friend of a friend, he came up to us and he said, you know, what was your daughter's name? And my dad was Rima Samaha. And he said, I'm so sorry she didn't make it. Her name, my dad said, how do you know? And he said, her name was on the list. I was thrown into a media frenzy the very next morning, and I was gladly doing it because I wanted to talk about Rima and who she was and how she was an amazing individual. And then we started learning about what happened. We started learning about the gunman and how he got his guns and how he should never have been able to purchase his guns. As I learned more, I became an advocate just naturally. All right, and are you going to the march? And I learned about what we could do to prevent something like that from happening again. How we can save lives. So I wanted to do that. I think Newtown got people to really start thinking about this in a different way, because this happened to young, innocent first graders and elementary school. What's going on? Is there anything I can help with? Is there anything going on? After Virginia Tech, we thought we were going to see change. We saw very minimal change, and what they put on it was a Band-Aid. After Rima was killed, there was this outpouring of love and support for myself, for my family. And, you know, as we learned about the details of the tragedy, I was really inspired and felt a lot of this energy to try to work to prevent something like this from happening again. And that's really what we're all trying to do. I mean, we feel like we've lost a lot already by losing my sister.
Those who purchase firearms at gun shows are not required to have background checks, as they are in stores like this one. And some gun rights advocates say they just aren't necessary.
You're not supposed to sell to anyone who's from out of state, anyone who is not a U.S. citizen, etc. So there are rules even with that, so there really isn't a loophole.
An individual can sell to an individual without requiring a background check, which means you don't know that that person you're selling it to might be a felon or otherwise restricted from owning a firearm. I think it's important, if individuals are going to sell to another individual, that you actually do it the right way and go through a dealer.
The US's gun culture can prove perplexing to some, especially given the many mass shootings the country has suffered. But clearly a love of guns is deeply rooted in the nation's history. Though, as constitutional lawyer and historian Adam Winkler explains, so is gun control.
Well, we often think of gun control as a modern 20th century.
I hate to interrupt, but with all that we've talked about in this class about the Second Amendment, it has become this accepted tenet that the Constitution enshrined a right for an individual to own a weapon. And it is not true. I don't know how many ways you can go through the wording and the history and all, and still continue to sing that song.
Invention, but nothing could be further from the truth. The truth is we've had gun control laws since the very founding of this nation. The founding fathers had gun control laws, for instance, barring large portions of the population from possessing firearms. They barred not only slaves and free blacks from having guns, but also law-abiding white people, namely loyalists. If you weren't willing to swear an oath of loyalty to the Constitution, then you could be forcibly disarmed. Our common understanding of the Wild West couldn't be further from the truth. These Wild West towns had the most restrictive gun control laws in the nation.
Now you boys hand your guns over.
Places like Tombstone, Arizona, or Dodge City, Kansas, famous gun havens of the West, they had restrictive laws that barred people from carrying their firearms in town. When you came to a Wild West town and you had guns, you had to check your guns with the local marshal. You'd get a little token in return that you could use to get your gun back when you left the town. And these laws were very strictly enforced because public safety really demanded keeping guns out of the hands of drunk cowboys who were coming through town. We think of the Wild West as the heart of America's gun culture, but in truth it was very much the heart of America's gun control culture.
We care about our president, so we protect him with armed Secret Service agents. Members of Congress work in offices surrounded by Capitol Police officers. Yet when it comes to our most beloved and vulnerable members of the American family, our children, we as a society leave them utterly defenseless.
Well, the NRA was not always the die-hard, no-compromises opponent of gun control we know today. In fact, for most of its history, the NRA supported reasonable gun control laws. In the 1920s and 1930s, for instance, the NRA was in some ways at the forefront of the gun control movement, writing and drafting and promoting in state after state laws to heavily restrict the public possession of firearms. Today's NRA files lawsuits trying to declare those very same laws that the NRA wrote unconstitutional under the Second Amendment. One sign of how much things have changed is if you look back through the NRA's signature magazine, The American Rifleman, and you can go back through decades of issues in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and you won't see a single mention of the Second Amendment. If you open up that magazine today, you'll see the Second Amendment mentioned on just about every page. The NRA changed literally overnight. At the annual membership meeting in 1977, a group of hardliners staged a coup. The current leadership of the NRA at the time was seeking to retreat from political activity, move the NRA's headquarters to Colorado Springs to focus on outdoors activities and huntsmen and hunting. And that angered a group of hardliners within the membership who thought guns were not about shooting ducks, they were about shooting criminals. And they wanted the NRA to become recommitted to political activity. And they staged a coup using the rules of order and a very well thought out plan in advance, and they surprised the leadership, and overnight they had replaced the entire board of the NRA with new hardliners committed to a very absolutist view of the Second Amendment.
Joining us to discuss the issues surrounding the gun control debate from the perspective of the passionate gun owner is Chuck Nesby, firearms instructor and a manager here at the Nova Firearms store in Falls Church, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C., and Jerry Souter, author of American Shooter, a personal history of gun culture in the United States. Chuck, you were telling us the guns are flying off the shelves since Newtown, since Barack Obama started talking about guns. You have a sticker, in fact.
Yes.
Barack Obama, #1 gun salesman.
He's been the top salesman of the year.
Who is buying these guns?
I'd say in the so-called assault weapons, which I don't believe exist in the civilian market, 40% of the market is women and senior citizens. Why? Because they're simple to operate.
What reason do they give for buying these guns?
Personal protection. And the second reason they give is they fear their government. They fear their government taking away their rights to own a firearm. Second, or third, tertiary, none of the semi-automatic firearms that you can buy that look military in style are issued to any military in the world. The AR series and the AK series of firearms that you see today in in the civilian market are all semi-automatic. They do not have a 3-round burst or a full automatic capability. That has been regulated by under the National Firearms Act since 1934. If you want to get a full automatic weapon or firearm...
Right, but you can still get a semi-automatic with a high-capacity magazine or clip, can't you?
Well, a high-capacity magazine, what difference does that make? High capacity is what, by definition? Some people say 7 rounds in New York, some people say 10 rounds, some people say 30 rounds, 14 rounds, whatever. That number varies, okay? You can change magazines out very quickly. Is it going to limit the number of Newtown school shootings? No, a person can walk in there with 10 magazines, change them very quickly before he's interdicted.
What do you make of the way that the discussion is handled by politicians when they talk about a common sense approach, for example? Does that help you understand where they're coming from, or does that seem a little patronizing, perhaps?
I think the whole concept of gun control is two things. I think it's a fallacious argument as far as the idea of what is an assault rifle. Everybody's perception of an assault rifle is something that everyone kind of understands what it is. It doesn't look like a hunting rifle. It doesn't look like a shotgun. It's its own unique style of gun, regardless of what you call it. And the idea of who has the ability to take weapons away from people, as far as the government is concerned, I think that's another thing that the NRA has beat the drum to get fear. Fear is a big thing as far as the National Rifle Association, and I've been a supporter of them for years. And when they made that wrong turn back out in the 60s and 70s, and all of a sudden got politicized, the argument, that's when they started to get in trouble. And beating the drum for fear and the idea to be able to just make an argument that, oh, you could change magazines really fast and before you're interdicted, that's all military jargon. That's the kind of stuff that you talk about when you're going into a combat situation.
But who does the NRA represent then? Is it a gun manufacturer's lobby now rather than the gun owners' union?
If you're asking me, I would say yes. I'd say the gun manufacturer and the NRA are hand in hand, which is not a bad thing. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's a matter of how they use the idea between what is a weapon and what is a sporting arm, or even a self-defense arm. There's that difference in there that you've got to always honor, and I think more familiarity with firearms at an early age, that helps people understand.
Well, Chuck, I mean, what about that then? I mean, clearly, with 300 million guns in circulation, they're not going anywhere. I mean, even if the government wanted to take them away, they couldn't.
Approximately for 1 gun for every person in the United States.
What about a public health approach then, using pragmatic, science-based policy to prevent injury, to look at gun design, to look at access, and just to the best of the ability to try and prevent people from getting killed? Wouldn't that be acceptable?
I think that's the goal of all of us. However, as I recall, I think cocaine and heroin are illegal. Yet people seem to have no problem finding it.
But you can take a public health policy to drugs which is successful as opposed to a criminal approach to drugs.
I'm just saying that trying to eliminate something like that, bad people want to do bad things, they're going to get access to it regardless of what you do. What you want to do is minimize the problem so that you can manage it to an acceptable level.
But will that discussion be acceptable given how fraught, how some would suggest how closed the NRA, for example, leadership is anyway, to even discussing some of these issues because they think it's one step to tyranny?
Well, there are some things that the NRA does that I don't agree with, but there are some things that I do agree with. For instance, the NRA's suggestion that we get a national database of people that are have mentally ill problems, I have real problem with, because branding people with a label that is an inexact science can lead to some innocent people being falsely accused of something. Now, but they're concerned that erosion of our Second Amendment rights, if you give a politician, what's a politician's objective? If you give a politician an inch, he takes a mile. His objective is to get reelected. He's going to say whatever he has to say to get reelected, regardless of what the facts or data really reveal. These guns that they're talking about restricting access to right now are used in very, very few crimes. Okay, I think the semi-automatic rifle may be used in 1% to 2% of crimes in the entire country. The handguns, because they can be concealed, are a lot more readily available for you committing crimes, and bad people, when they get them, need to be stopped. Now, you can stop handgun crime almost overnight in the United States. The will just doesn't exist to do it. How do you do that? Simple. Simply make the penalty too harsh to commit the crime. If you commit a crime and you're convicted of a handgun crime in a court of law, it's mandatory life in prison, no parole. That would drive handgun crime down quite a bit.
Well,
Jerry?
No, I agree. It certainly would be a deterrent, but I also think it's a paper tiger. I don't believe that it's something that could ever even be thought of because of the penal institutions of the United States couldn't handle the volume. What happened in Prohibition back when they tried to legislate morality and make it illegal to drink alcohol in the United States? They made drunks out of a lot of people that had never taken a drink in their lives. The minute you start to put heavy draconian laws on anything in this country, the guns go into the closets, they go under the beds, they go, people still hang on to them. But sure. But that's not really a way to go at it. The way to go at it is popular demand that something be done, and you have the more people that you have saying, okay, we have to come to a solution on this, that will drive the legislators, and that's where you start the root problem, with the root causes of the problem.
Chuck Nesby, the president has said repeatedly he has no intention of coming after everyone's guns. And the Supreme Court has now repeatedly upheld the individual's right to bear arms. So what are some gun owners so concerned about?
Well, I think the gun owners are concerned about the fact that they don't believe the president, quite frankly, and they believe that their Second Amendment rights to own firearms are being threatened.
But what's the basis of that fear, given the assurances that we've had repeatedly?
Assurances from the government have been rather short-lived. We have a history in this country of abusing the law whenever it's to the government's convenience. I'll give you a couple of examples. The internment of the Japanese during World War II at gunpoint. Andrew Jackson's Trail of Tears, forcing the American Indians, after winning a Supreme Court case, to vacate their land at gunpoint and march them to Oklahoma. For years, blacks in the South were feared by the predominant white public because if they became armed, they would outnumber the slave owners of the South. So, given those things that have happened in American history, there's the concern that it's not beyond a very large government to take advantage of them. I believe it was Thomas Jefferson that said that a government big enough to give you everything is big enough to take everything.
Jerry Souter, thank you very much.
Okay, so I wanted you to hear that argument going on and to kind of get a sense of, the people who are defending rights to weapons and all of that, what I find, he said they don't trust their government, right? That was a Navy captain. Said, well, they don't trust the government. But we did trust our government in World War II. And it took a campaign to be able to have people lose faith and confidence in the government. By the way, that's the art of terrorism. You take a any of the terrorist groups, they're a small number of people who have a grievance and they want to act against that grievance. They want to act it out. And so they want people to follow them, but most people are not going to go join a terrorist group. And so what the terrorist looks to do is people will say, well, you know, I know this is bad and that's bad, but you know, I'm not gonna get out there and demonstrate and do all this other stuff. So what you have is the terrorist then wants to get people to lose faith in their government. How do they do it? They perpetrate some guerrilla act, a bomb, killing some people here, there, and the other. The 9/11 attack, those are 20 people, right? 20 people. And we wound up getting into wars that lasted for 20, 30 years. So it's what you do, it's the key tactic is I want to get them to lose faith in their government and their government's ability to protect them. And that's no small task, but that is the heart of it. The theorist who I reference a lot, Carlos Madagella, was the Carlos the Jackal, and that's, you know, and he wrote a book to tell other guerrillas, terrorists, how to do it. What's our objective? And if I provoke the bigger guy, then he'll retaliate. And when he retaliates, it'll that radicalize people to come to my cause, and they'll lose faith in the people that they used to believe in. So it's not a new phenomenon. Let me get to, I have one more that I want to show. We saw a little bit of it last week, but I want to pick it up because, you know, we looked at the readout, and this is in Idaho and surrounding areas. And these are not stupid people, though. I mean, they have a narrative in their head that is a logical narrative. That is a kind of a reasonable narrative. It may be disconnected from reality, but what their thoughts are not, you know, bizarre. They make sense. And so a lot of these folks here in the readout, they are against the nanny state. The nanny state, that is government social programs. They are offended by it. They are doing pretty well, and they don't want government interfering with their world. Their world has benefited from government actions in every aspect of it. You know, it's interesting. Here is Elon Musk wants to be free from the government. And Elon Musk is, you know, high tech and all, you know, he runs X and he's got all this other stuff going. Mind you, everything about computers was developed by the American government. Everything about the internet was developed by the American government. So they've all benefited from it, but they don't see that they were a part of the nanny state.
As far as we are concerned about freedom in California. So we came up here in Labor Day of 10 and looked around. We knew kind of what to expect politically. We said, this is what we need to be. So 3 weeks later, we came back, looked at a few houses, and bought this one. What's interesting is that a number of years ago, Idaho was a blue state, and Kootenai County was a blue county. And then people started getting in here and saying, you know, this is not the way to do it. And there were enough people who came here, got registered to vote, and said, we want to see changes.
So tell me about what happened when the election results were announced.
Oh, well, uproar would be putting it mildly. The people that we hang with are politically astute. We pay attention to what's going on, and the numbers did not add up. And they would already talk about what was going on, and most people said, no, something's gone on here. So there was a tremendous amount of anger. There still is. People say, well, let it go. No, this is my country. What has happened, Joe Biden and his minions are leading this country down the road to perdition. Right? That's how we look at it. He is there illegally, and I am not ashamed to say that. I will tell that to anybody. What he has done is wrong.
And is there a sense in which some of the recent arrivals post-election see North Idaho as a place to kind of congregate with other conservatives?
There have been plenty of conversations about the potential balkanization of Idaho, and we'll use the Great American Redoubt as an example. The Great American Redoubt is Idaho, eastern Washington, eastern Oregon, Montana, and Wyoming. We don't want big government, we want nanny government, we want freedom. And one of the things that's important is people need to understand that those of us who espouse the belief in the Great American Redoubt, it's not based on religion, it is based on political thinking, because that's really what's going on here. So we don't care what religion you are, so long as you come in with the thinking that you agree with your compatriots here. And I use compatriot in that very sense of patriotic friends. So that's really what we're talking about, is a community, a very large community, but that's what we want to do.
Good morning, Patriots. Welcome and thank you for tuning in here at the Voice of the American Redoubt.
Radio Free Redoubt is a program that broadcasts across North Idaho and neighbouring Washington state. It is hosted by Jack Robertson and his wife Renee Holiday. It features a mix of readings from the Bible and extreme right-wing takes on political news.
They are not upholding any of our constitutional laws whatsoever because they're communists and they're in a takeover mode. They're sitting in the highest seat in the land, you know, illegitimately, but they're still sitting in that seat.
Yep.
And until we rectify it.
Yeah, we need a revival, I'll tell you that. One of the people who advertises on the show is Chris Walsh, an estate agent who sells properties to people who want to live off the grid and be prepared for a societal breakdown.
There is an exodus happening in America today, from cities full of crime and corruption to the rural areas of clean and sustainable living. Like-minded patriots are coming to North Idaho in search of a simpler, self-reliant lifestyle. I'm Chris Walsh, broker and owner of Revolutionary Realty, based in the heart of America's Great Redoubt, North Idaho.
Some of the properties he sells are so remote he has to fly there in his own plane.
Now these people were pretty clever. They wanted to have more dwellings. So what they did, you see that red building out there? Mm-hmm. There's that one, and there's another one right over there. And those are skid-mounted houses. Those came from North Dakota and South Dakota, from the oil fields. The vast majority of preppers, to me, are really analogous to a 1968 hippie. And the reason for it is because those folks were looking for freedom, they wanted clean water, and they wanted non-interference. They didn't want to be told what to do. It was an expression of freedom. And that's why you see so many of these people come up here, because they want those freedoms, and a lot of them have just been taken away, you know, where they're at.
Okay, Dave, we can open for discussion.
Okay. Please use the raise your hand function. And so, Zach, how many of these militia types are there out there?
Well, remember, militias are outlawed in all 50 states. So the people who call themselves militias are not really militias, but there's a lot of them. I mean, it's I don't know the number, but I would think the Southern Poverty Law Center has a list of all their names. But yeah, there's a lot of them. Living off the grid and getting ready for the next Civil War.
And are they basing that Biden was not legitimate based on Trump's lies?
Well, you know, that's the stuff I always find real interesting is when people will come out and be very assertive in their position where they have absolutely no evidence to support it. You know, the numbers didn't add up. Well, what the hell are you talking about? What numbers didn't add up? So you see, it's easy to say broad generality like that when you know you're not challenged and you don't have to actually present. It's like, but you know, for Trump in all those places that he thought the numbers didn't add up, it went to court and the court threw it out. 60 some odd cases. So it's there. It's really when you bring them to court, it is put up or shut up. But if you're not in court, you can just spout off this stuff. And if you're, you know, a persuasive person and seem to know what you're talking about, there's a lot of people who are willing to listen.
Does anybody else have any questions for Sal?
Do you have any idea how if this Redoubt area, have they had a big I know the mix of people seems to have changed or they've coalesced or something, but overall, do we know if they've had a big influx of population, or is this more like people, a lot of people that were there are kind of more just self-identifying with this group?
Well, I think they're a small percentage of they're a fringe group. So, you know, you kind of put all the fringes together and it looks like it's a big thing. But notice some of the houses that they have are things that were picked up off of oil drilling spots. The house was moved over, mobile home, move it over, plop it there, and okay, this is where we're now going to live. But there aren't many people who want to do that. But certainly, you know, as extreme as it is, it'll capture attention. My point in wanting to show that was that there are people who have been so influenced by it all that they're willing to do that. The guy who was talking about, you know, the numbers didn't add up. He's not a dumb guy. He's a smart guy. He's obviously doing well. It's like, okay, we don't want to live in California anymore. And we're just going to go to Idaho and I'll see if there's some, I've heard about Redoubt. I'm going to go check it out. Okay. And so we went and looked at a few houses and just decided to buy that one. So, I mean, you know, if you have the ability to just go pick up and go off to another state and find a house and say, I'm buying that. You know, you kind of got some means, some resources, right? But
undoubtedly,
yeah, I mean,
and it looks like a big area, but it's a lot of land.
It's a lot of land, right?
You know, in general, you know, we know by representation in Congress that those are have very few representatives because it is mostly land and not so many people. But anyways, well, I will get out of here.
Nancy?
Well,
I'm sorry, Glenn.
I'd like to know whether they pay taxes, number one. Number two, do they benefit from any of the programs like Medicare, Social Security, or any of that? If not, it's really tough to live in an area where you're supposed to go out and catch your own fish and clean them for every single meal and grow and can your own vegetables for every single meal. So I don't see how they could possibly be doing anything more than dreamland. They might as well rename it from Redoubt to Dreamland because it's not a practical way to live. So I just want to know if they, are they sending their tax money in after they do their taxes and send it in, or otherwise, why isn't the IRS knocking on the door?
Yeah, I don't know for certain, but I'm going to guess that they're paying their taxes, or the IRS would be knocking on their door. Yeah, no, sure, they're going to benefit from Medicare and Social Security and all of that. But what you get is this mindset, which is best illustrated by the Tea Party protest, where the person is at a town hall meeting and shouting at folks and saying, I don't want the government to put its hands on my Medicaid. It's just I mean, I've had so many people who would make an argument to me about how excuse me, how the government can't do anything right. They're incompetent. If it wasn't for government, we would not have half the things we take for granted. These cell phones, right? This little thing that runs our life, it would not be here, but for government. It was government funds that supported research at the University of Pennsylvania that gave us our first model computer. So, and really government never really gets the chance to argue back, to say, wait a minute, I want to give my side of the story. So there are people who really, and if you have someone like the Koch network, which is deliberately working underground and is using very sophisticated communications experts and political scientists and others as to how to manipulate people underground for your agenda. Mind you, the things that you get them to support may not actually be the issue that you want to get. It's you disguise it. There's a private agenda. And that's what they do. They're very good at it. And people can be very well manipulated.
Isla?
I think this kind of continues your vein. The people move there for clean air and clean water and very little government interference. The clean air and the clean water that they have is because of government interference. That's ironic.
No, it's so true. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised to find some of the people living there, or mind you, this takes in Wyoming and the East Coast of Oregon and Washington, and so from that position, I'll bet you there's some chemical company executives who are poisoning the water in Louisiana. You know, they don't want to live in Louisiana anymore. They want to get out of there. And so they're going someplace, but they're the people who polluted the water. You know, it's
Bob?
And would it be small on my part if I pointed out that the person who was driving the car, listening to the radio show about government interference, and was driving on a road which was financed 90% by the federal government, and by the state, and also the real estate agent who landed his plane on an airfield was landing, probably on an airfield that was funded by, at least by the state government.
No, you're absolutely right, Bob. It's that you know, look, I don't have any problem criticizing government. I criticize government all the time. But hopefully I have orchestrated some level of evidence as best as I could to make the case as to what the government did wrong in this, that, or the other thing. But I also know that I rely on government. I mean, if I want to know when I go into a restaurant that I'm not going to eat stuff that's going to kill me. When I check into a hotel, I'd like to know that bed bugs aren't going to get me that night.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I'm in trouble and I dial 911, I hope like hell there's government there.
Right.
Or if there's a fire in my house, that some government person comes to save my butt. I mean, it's absurd. But what happens is, again, why I said that this class on the Second Amendment isn't about the Second Amendment. It's about a political tool that drives wedges. So, you know, you're not realizing what really is happening. Donald Trump is a product of it. I don't think that they wanted Donald Trump to be their person in the office, but what the hell, he's there now, and they figured out, with all the groundwork that they had laid before Trump's first election, what happened is Donald Trump took advantage of their fertile field. He didn't lay any of the groundwork. He just took advantage of it. And then he gets elected. The second time around, they go, wait a minute, we're not going to let that happen again. We're going to suck up to him, and we're going to put our people in there. So you get the Heritage Foundation, you get the Federalist Society, you get, you know, the Cato, Cato Institute, and others who are all owned by the Koch network. So the people, Russell Voigt, I mean, you really, I was going to do a slide of him. He's from the Heritage Foundation. He's the guy who has said, we're going to end, you know, foreign aid. We're just going to stop it, you know. And I wanted to put a picture of it, is like, I'd like to know, if you believe in reincarnation, who do you suppose this guy was in a previous life? I mean, you know, I mean, this is that, you know, adamant hardliner who I don't care about anybody but me. And we're going to slash the federal government because they're helping too many other people. Well, look, we live in a country of 330 million people, 350 million people. and if we don't, if we only serve 3,000, well, then there's a hell of a lot more people who aren't being served, and they're going to attack. The interesting thing for me, when we talked about the Iraq War and how horrible Saddam Hussein was. Saddam Hussein kicked out the oil companies, kicked them out, and said, you guys are stealing our resources. I'm throwing you out, and we're taking those resources. And in doing so, Iraq experienced financial growth that was enormous. They had a huge budget excess. And Saddam Hussein came from the Sunni faction of Iraq, which was the minority population, but has had power. The Shia is the majority of the population. And Saddam was spending a lot of money on schools, hospitals, all that stuff. And he got blowback from his fellow Sunni. And he said, there's a lot more of them than there are of us. I'm going to make sure that they're going to benefit from this too. And when he got too much blowback, he went into the joint session of Congress with a gun and he shot people. It's true. It's what happened. So we may be faced with, there'll be a lot more of them. Well, I'd say than there are of us, but I'll never have that kind of money. So I'll be one of them. But, it's just dumb. I mean, you're just setting yourself up for, just think if we eliminate Medicaid. I think of the news photographers with their cameras at nursing homes as they move everybody out. And all these people are going to be cheering, we got rid of Medicaid. Oh, we also got grandma. We got rid of Medicaid, but we got grandma. Now you're going to have to take care of grandma. Sure. You weren't doing such a good job of it before, which is why we had to move her into a nursing home. It's just...
Yeah. Madeline, do you have a quick question here to finish up?
I just wanted to say, this may seem off topic, but I really don't think it is. In case you don't already know about this, you can go on your preferred browser and put in Project 2025 Tracker. And there is a website that tracks everything that is happening with Project 2025. And I think that's a good thing for everybody to know. So I just wanted to mention it. That's it.
Thank you, Madeline.
Oh, and it's important to understand that that is the Koch network.
And let's not forget that the new head of the Office of Management and Budget is Vogt, and he says he wants to get rid of the Federal Reserve.
What?
Great idea.
Oh, yeah.
Great idea. That's a Pulitzer Prize winner right there.
That's all. That's it. That's all I have.
But mind you, Donald Trump, his whole existence is breaking things.
Yes.
There's no other objective. It is break. He broke every company he's had. He broke 2 casinos. There's no possible way to go bankrupt at a casino unless you're a gambler. But
if you're a patron, you can definitely go bankrupt.
Right. If you're
anyway.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, everybody, thank you for hanging in
Yeah.
there.
Thanks, advice,
So everybody
Sal.
give some warm applause to Sal for
Thanks, Sal,
Thank you.
for making
Thank
us even
you.
more depressed.
Now,
yes.
Yeah. You have a great day.
Bye, y'all.
Better.
Yeah.
Hope you feel better.
Mark,
Uh,
Feel